So Bella and Duncan arrives in Paris. It is snowing, and Duncan is on a bench, shivering, while Bella, her black hair down to her ankles, stands by him. They're not in the city by choice. They were kicked out of the cruise that they were in after Bella gives away all of Duncan's winnings from gambling to try and absolve her own guilt upon seeing suffering for the first time with her own eyes. Now they're on this bench, penniless, and their wildly different views of the situation that they find themselves in becomes apparent when Bella says, "Is it not an interesting experiment? We have nothing. How will we live now?" Duncan replies dourly, "I don't know." Bella is wearing a yellow raincoat, which the costume designer Holly Waddington herself dubbed the condom raincoat, a clue for what Bella does for money while in Paris, sex work. Returning from the brothel after having her first customer and elated at earning her very first wages, Bella finds Duncan, a chocolate eclair in her hands. Upon telling Duncan how she afforded the eclair, he screams at her, "You are a monster, a whore and a monster. You are a demon sent from hell to rip my spirit to shreds, to punish my tiny sins with a tsunami of destruction, to take my heart and pull it like taffy, to ruin me. I look at you and see nothing but ugliness." She replies, "That last bit was uncalled for and makes no sense, as your odes to my beauty have been boring but constant. And now a simple act of letting old wrinkled man ride on me seems to erase this." Duncan then says that sex work is the worst thing that a woman could do, to which she replies, "We should definitely not ever marry. I am a flawed, experimenting person, so I will need a husband with a more forgiving disposition. My instinct now tells me, you are not that." And then, just to sprinkle more salt into Duncan's wound, Bella rips open the stitching in her dress, pulls some bills that were there all along, and says, "I shall buy you a passage back to London." Hello! Welcome to A Love Letter to. First of all, so excited to introduce a video to the podcast. You are indeed in my room. This is my bed, and this is a portrait of yours truly. This hat I got from Prague when we went there on vacation last Christmas, and I'm very, very excited for today because not only are we in video, live, not really live, but you know what I mean, for the first time. I mean, like, if you're on YouTube, you're probably seeing this. Spotify is gonna have this as well. Like, whatever podcast that you're listening to is gonna have this video on it. So I just want to say welcome. I hope that you guys can hear and see me properly. I am experimenting in the spirit of Bella Baxter, okay? I come to you in the spirit of Bella Baxter. And that's the second reason why I'm so excited for today. Poor Things won the Oscars for costume design last year. I didn't see it then because I was swept up in the Barbie of it all. But I decided to watch it just a couple of nights ago, and I really, really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the film, and I think that it deserved its Oscar win. Bella Baxter and Poor Things. This movie was directed by Yorgos Lanthimos, and the costuming was done by Holly Waddington. It is really, really well made, and I think with regards to storytelling, and I always talk all of the time in both my podcasts in here and the one that I'm producing for Head Stuff Network, clothes are just a tool for storytelling, and I think Holly Waddington does a masterful job at that with this movie. She worked very closely with Yorgos Lanthimos when it came to sort of ideating the clothes that Bella Baxter is going to wear. Not just Bella Baxter, but also like the supporting cast. And I think that it really shows. If you were to ask me what this movie is about, I would say that it is a coming-of-age story that is set in steampunk Victorian London. That is sort of a very general look at the movie, and in my opinion, that is like what it really boils down to. But there's a lot of different themes and topics that you could sort of take away from it. First of all, there's a theme of, female liberation and self-discovery, which I really identified with. But then others also say that its portrayal of femininity is perhaps overly sexual and male gazy. There is a lot of sexual scenes in this movie. But I would also say that for a lot of it, the portrayal of sex was very sterile. Bella Baxter, as she says in that scene that I introduced to you in the beginning, is an experimenting person. And with that, I think like there are two things to think about here. One, it is sex through Bella's point of view. And two, sex and the female relationship with the male gaze is sort of part and parcel of the whole woman experience. And as we're looking at a coming of age story of a woman from infancy to, adulthood, I think it would be doing the experience a disservice if we didn't have a look at how sex plays a role in being a woman in society. The official genre of this film is comedic sci-fi, and it won many, many awards during its Oscar run, but also like a lot of other awards. It was named one of the best movies of 2023 in the Oscars. It won Best Actress for Emma Stone's portrayal of Bella Baxter, which was incredible, from her inflection to like the way that she speaks to the way that she talks, even when she was like a toddler, an infant. It's amazing. I think it's very well deserved. But also it won the Oscars for Best Production Design, Best Makeup and Hairstyling, Best Costume Design, and it went up against Barbie, Killers of the Flower Moon, Napoleon, and Oppenheimer. Visually, it is very unique and very impactful. The plot is essentially about, obviously, Bella Baxter. How many times can I say the name Bella Baxter in this podcast? Before she was Bella Baxter, she was another woman called Victoria. And Victoria was pregnant. But Victoria was in an abusive relationship with her husband and wanted to escape, presumably, and decides to jump off of a bridge. Her body was later recovered and brought to your stereotypical Victorian steampunky mad scientist. His name is Godwin, or as Bella calls him later, God. And God essentially creates Bella by taking the infant's brain and transplanting it to the body of Victoria. Hence, Bella Baxter was born. And the movie covers all of the parts of growing up, from infancy all the way to adulthood. And I love how Holly Waddington reflects that in the costume that she decides to wrap Emma Stone in. Let's talk about Bella Baxter's costume. So as I said before, Lanthimos worked closely with the costume designer Holly Waddington to reflect Bella's growth and development through her wardrobe. And the whole idea with the costume is to sort of capture the essence of each stage, of each growing stage that Bella Baxter finds herself in. Let's talk about the infant clothes. The movie goes from black and white to color. And the black and white parts were the parts where Bella was an infant, sort of like pre-adulthood, pre-teen/teens, pre-her finding herself and finding her own way in the world, essentially, when she was still living with her family, with God, with Mrs. Prim, and with the other guy who I forgot the name of. I'm so sorry. But yes, it's split in black and white. And during the black and white moments, we see Bella in a lot of like sort of infant clothes, puffy clothing, very relaxed, a lot of white, and a lot of frills. If you've ever seen sort of Victorian images of like infants during, like baptism pictures of infants, that is the kind of vibe that it is giving. Holly Waddington actually did sort of like a feature in Vogue for the costumes of Poor Things, and she says, "We committed to the idea that you'll never see her properly dressed. Like all children, I have 2 little children. When you dress them very quickly, they become undressed. So in everything you see, there's something missing. She's more dressed up top, she'll have a voluminous blouse on, but with a pair of knickers and bare feet. I wanted really childlike fabrics, quilting, ruffles, seersucker, things that felt a bit nappy-ish. And that last bit about the texture of the fabric and the type of fabrics that they were using during this time period in the film, it brings to mind a bubble-wrapped Bella, as if, the people around her are really trying to protect her and trying to stop her from hurting herself. Now, in the film, you see this with Godwin, with the way that she shields Bella from the outside world. She didn't want Bella to go out, even though Bella so wanted to explore, which then leads to her leaving for Lisbon then. But also, like, Bella was essentially an infant, a toddler. She's learning how to walk. She's crawling. And when you see toddlers, they fall a lot, but they're very resilient because, I don't know, of like the way that their body is, they just seem like they bounce up. And obviously with a body of like a grown woman, it doesn't quite work the certain way for Bella. So it almost makes you think like they have to bubble wrap her in clothing. They have to protect her at all costs. And that's reflected in this, what Waddington also calls like the weird bustle cage. Essentially, there's this bustle in the film, but it looks like it's been inflated. Like, it looks like an inflatable bustle, and if you sit down on it, it would be quite soft. If Bella falls on her butt, for example, she would just like bounce back and not be hurt. And yeah, I think that's really reflected in the garments in the infancy section of the film. And then Waddington goes on to say there are also lots of references to female genitalia. There's a blouse we call the vagina blouse, then the clitoris blouse. They all have these orifices, a slash down the middle, and then lots of pleats. To me, it's much more so a film about how it feels like to grow up as a woman. It is very woman forward, and it did make me think of the experiences that I had growing up as a woman from, like especially that part where you realize how horrible the world is, which for me happened around like 15 or 16 and really gave me like a massive existential crisis. And we see Bella going through that as well when she sees suffering from up in her like ivory tower. I think it's like when she was in Athens, and a friend that she makes, I think his name is Max, shows her the suffering of the people down below who are starving, who are dying, the babies and all of that. And Bella was so distraught that was when she gave Duncan's money from gambling. Well, what she believed was she was giving it to the poor, but really like two of the people in the shifts stole it. And then in what would be considered Bella's preteens or teens age, she starts dressing herself. She starts finding her own style reflected in the clothing. She's figuring out how the world works. This is the part where Bella goes to Lisbon with Duncan. There's nobody there telling her what to wear, telling her what is appropriate in society. You know what I mean? She would just be outside in a short skirt, in her like little white boots. She would wear whatever essentially she wanted to wear and what she had. And Waddington says about this part, there are other pieces that go with the jacket being like this light blue jacket that she paired with sort of a white ruffled top and a yellow mini skirt in the Lisbon part of the film. So she says there are other pieces that go with this jacket, like a Victorian partlet or modesty piece, the thing that fills in the naked chest. But when I was looking at pieces from the period, I thought they're almost like little crop tops. What would they be like on their own? In this scene, the idea was that Bella's gone back to the hotel with Duncan, they've been in bed together, and when she comes out, she just doesn't bother to put her skirt on. Her housemaid, Mrs. Prim, isn't there to tell her to, so it doesn't occur to her. So she's just wearing this 30s style underwear. We tried it with Victorian bloomers, but they looked too periody. And these funny boots, which were inspired by 60s courage. And I think that this ensemble also is a nod to teen style. Like when you think of like a stereotypically female teenage outfit, you would think crop tops and mini skirts, and that's exactly what Bella has here. And then we go on to when they get thrown off the ship into Paris. And here we see the condom coat for the first time. This is just like this piece of like latex raincoat. It's like sort of like a dirty yellow color that Bella wears when she first gets to Paris with Duncan. So they're broke and they have like absolutely no money. And Holly says it's hilarious because it's freezing and she's wearing that, but also because she wears it for her first sexual encounter in the brothel and she is essentially wearing a giant condom. I basically wanted it to evoke the color of a period condom. It sounds so revolting, but that's what I was thinking. Near the very end, we see Bella in this sort of like dark academia look with a twist. Think Wednesday Addams, but slightly hipper, actually. So in this part of the film, she's working at the brothel. She has her best friend with her, Tonette. But she's also been going to these like socialist meetings and also aspires now to become a doctor just like her father. Holly says that the inspiration here came from socialist gatherings, incorporating elements of black dress and referencing images of Victorian medical school to craft Bella's evolving wardrobe. And she says, by this point, Bella realizes she's going to be a doctor, so she gets herself a proper suit, explains Waddington. She and her friend Tonette have these big jackets that were very popular in France during that time. This piece is based on an original jacket. It's actually a carbon copy, but with less trimming. But Bella hasn't put the skirt with it because she still hasn't learned to do these things. So she just has bare legs and these Victorian boots. I think we see her in this look sitting down first, so you think, oh, she blends in now with all of these men in suits. Then she gets up and you see her legs and think, no, she's still Bella. At the very end of the film, we see Bella wear this white turtleneck. Obviously, turtlenecks are not exactly the thing that you think about when you think Victorian era, but I think it reflects the modernity in the way that Bella is thinking now. Bella looks sure of herself. She looks like an intelligent, modern, and confident young woman. And when you think of turtlenecks, it's really like a signature. It's a code for smartness. You know, think all the nerds that are portrayed in other films, like especially like from, I'm thinking like 2000s and 90s, they would usually have like turtlenecks on, and then think Steve Jobs and his turtleneck uniform. And then I want to talk about the whiteness of the turtleneck, because a few minutes before the ending of the movie, Bella actually almost gets married, and obviously she wears white for the wedding, but it had like these like massive like puffy shoulders that made you think of the puffiness of her infant clothes. It almost makes you feel like she's going back to restricting herself, to caging herself, to being protected by the people around her. You could think of it as protection, but also as being a prison, you know? Going from that to the white turtleneck, which is like comfortable, it's modern, the aesthetic is like wildly different, but it's the same color. I think it is a callback that was probably made by Holly and Yorgos as well. We don't ever see her get married. She decides to bring Tonette over to her house with her to stay with her. And yeah, we see her and her household in this like very modern setup that is not the traditional like Victorian thing. I think one of the main reasons why Poor Things won that Oscar is that Holly does a masterful job of not only taking an existing aesthetic, but also like making it her own. So when you think like Victorian steampunk, what do you think about? Dark colors, black, you know, sort of copper, brass things, a lot of like metal, a lot of pulleys. You're thinking, in my head, there's like a lot of like Doctor Who episode that is very steampunky, you know what I mean? You're thinking like little cogs, little gears. And that element is definitely still there for sure, but I think the way that Holly embraces color and whimsy means that the steampunk aesthetic has evolved for her. She brings it forward, essentially. We will get to the sort of like significance for me of the colors later, but Holly finds new ways to style historical outfits. There's a modernity, like a sense of modernity, as I mentioned before, not just with the turtleneck, but also think of the cage bustle, the inflatable cage bustle, which was actually, for Holly, also looks kind of like Montclair-ish, which I love. Holly says everything comes from a historical source here. All her bodices, for instance, are based on Victorian patterns. I just haven't been slavish in the use of materials or the way that things are worn. She then continues, I love that element of how would Bella put clothing together with the way her mind works at this point. So here she's talking about the dark academia look in Paris when she's like an aspiring doctor and going to all these like socialist meetings. At the end, there are these very military-looking dresses that look like nothing you've seen Bella wear. Things are much more form-fitting and constrained, but that's because she's come to a place where she's grown and decided who she is and what she's going to do. She's not assimilating necessarily, but there's just more structure there. She definitely comes to her own style-wise. She finds what works for her, and that's really interesting and amazing to see. Now, let's talk about the colors that are used all throughout the film, especially in the costumes. As I've said before, the film goes from black and white to color, and that shift happens when Bella leaves her home for the first time, her family for the first time, and travels to Lisbon with Duncan. The apple is an important symbol in this film. So when she was still living with Godwin and her family, she takes an apple and uses it to explore herself sexually, you know what I mean? She's like in the middle of this table. She doesn't know. She's like an infant. She has like a toddler's brain. And then the interaction with Mrs. Prim and her is really funny. She says, Bella discover happy when she want. And then she shows Mrs. Prim what she does, and Mrs. Prim starts, shouting and having, a conniption. But from this comes the sort of like color palette that we later see her in. So it's a lot of like pinks, yellows, and oranges. And in my opinion, these colors have a meaning behind them when she wears them in the film. So the yellow/orange for me is a symbol of defiance. She wears yellow in the dining room scene in Lisbon with Duncan, where she slaps Duncan in the face. Basically, she wouldn't act in the way that Duncan wants her to act. He wanted Bella to be like a lady, to like stick to a script, essentially. Obviously, the condom raincoat is also a symbol of defiance. But also, at the very end of the movie, when Bella shoots her abusive husband in the foot, she wears yellow. And, there's nothing more defying than shooting somebody, I guess. And then pink is what she wears, in my opinion, when she expresses the freedom to be her own self, her true self, without the constrictions of sort of like Victorian societal codes. She's defying societal expectations. For example, when she was in the same restaurant actually with Duncan, and she starts listening to the drummers, and she becomes so enraptured by the beat that she starts sort of like dancing wildly. Like Duncan tries and sort of control her and like dance with her in a way that is acceptable in like polite society, but she keeps wanting to get away from Duncan and sort of dance in a very unusual, unhinged way. But that's just her being herself, and she wears this like pink skirt during that scene. The yellows, the oranges, and the pinks all have like different meanings to them, but there are two other colors that I wanted to talk about. First, the white. When she was an infant, we see her wear a lot of white clothing, and to me that symbolized confinement. And then we see her in white as well, obviously during the wedding, and then she turns that around with the white turtleneck that she wears at the very end. And then blue also is an important color in the film. To me, it symbolized oppression. So as I said, before Bella was Bella, she was a woman called Victoria who was escaping her abusive husband. And in the scene, it's actually the scene that the movie opens into. We see Victoria jumping off a bridge, and she's wearing this dark blue dress that is just so gorgeous. It is like a symbol of freedom from oppression, I suppose. You know, when we talk about also the Lisbon outfit, the one with the light, it's like the sky blue sort of Victorian jacket, she is escaping from Duncan and from Godwin, her father, at that point, and sort of explores the city herself for the first time. So, in my opinion, this movie is absolutely deserving of the Oscars win that it had. It is not only an incredible film, it's like visually stimulating. It is funny, and I really loved Emma Stone's performance in it. I thought that she was marvelous. But as I've said in the beginning, it's a true testament to Holly Waddington's expertise when it comes to costume design. The storytelling really does come through, and I say this every single time. Clothes are so much more interesting when there's like a story attached to them, and it makes me want to watch her other films. The Great and Lady Macbeth, she also designed the costumes for those. But yeah, I really, really recommend it. And you know, you're probably watching this podcast and you have already seen the film, and if so, let me know what you thought about the film in the comment section, in my DMs, wherever. But if you haven't watched the film yet, and for some reason you listened to this podcast before you did that, I really, really recommend that you watch it, because it's stunning and it's an enjoyable experience. I would say there is a lot of sex scenes, so if you're not into all that, then don't watch it. It's fine. I will not take it personally, but this has been a love letter too. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed seeing me face to face in the more sort of casual, informal, like conversation-y tone that I'm sort of like going for in the next few episodes of the podcast. I've been your host, Daniela Lavario, and yeah, let me know what you think of this video, and subscribe to the pod, subscribe to my channel, and follow me wherever you're listening to your podcast, because next week we will be jumping into some of the Oscar nominations for Best Costume Design this year. I'm very, very excited. They have like a really good selection this year, although I'm gonna confess I haven't seen Gladiator 2, and I don't think that I'm gonna, because I just don't know if I want to spend my time that way. But maybe I will. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe I'll surprise myself one evening and just like watch the movie with my dad or something. I haven't even seen the first one. Anyways, that's all for next week. We're gonna be talking about my pick for Best Costume Design this Oscar season, to the surprise of absolutely nobody. Wicked is amazing, and I will go on and on and on and on and on and on about this next week. But before that, follow us on our socials at A Love Letter to Podcast and everything. If you enjoy this episode, do leave us a review wherever you're listening. It really does help the show. And feel free to send me a love DM about what you think of this episode and what movies you want me to go through next. Again, I've been your host, Daniela Lavario, and I will see you next week. Bye!